Thunder Strike Back. 6 Warriors. Author, Wild Wolverine. The expressions of several Chinese soldiers nearby seemed to be a little surprised. The colonel thought, they probably haven't seen the old guy with gray beard flying a plane. Yes, Chinese soldiers don't have beards. Hello, the colonel greeted, jumping off the metal ladder. When he took off the combat anti-G vest with the oxygen tube inserted, everyone nearby saw his rank of colonel, which seemed less dazzling for his age. The colonel shook hands with several people onlookers. He noticed that the highest rank among the group was a lieutenant colonel of the Chinese army, which was very close to the line of actual control. Presumably the purpose of these people's visit was to investigate the Indian army. Now the lieutenant colonel seems to have something to say. Mr. Colonel, we heard about today's battle. The Indian Air Force dispatched Su-30 aircraft. The Chinese lieutenant colonel asked the question in English, and the question seemed very direct. They send out Su-30s every day, it's nothing new, it's just a trick today. Hee, the worst is not this, the Indian 16th Army southeast of the Makha Valley will rush over at any time, and their sappers are building roads and bridges, and tons of shallow-depth strongholds. I've never seen them so efficient. Well, my friend, I can't say too much, I can only report to my superiors. The colonel deliberately mentioned the ground in India. The troops, as expected, worked, and the Chinese lieutenant colonel immediately turned back and said a few words to the others in private. Hello, I'm a staff officer of the Chinese army. My name is Lin Huaisheng. The lieutenant colonel introduced himself solemnly. Me, it's the squadron commander of the 26th Squadron, Mohammed Sami. The two sides shook hands again, and when they walked past the plane side by side, Colonel Sami patted the Thunderbolt fighter, and the skin was still intact. In fever. Very good aircraft, but it was a mistake for the air staff to think of her as an attack aircraft. You mean, this kind of small plane is more suitable for air combat? Lin Huaisheng asked. Yes, of course it requires more money, such as electro-optical radar, which works well in the mountains, and refueling equipment. The people in the staff spend too much money on the F-16 of the Falcon Squadron, which will let the United States people know our every move, said the colonel, who seemed overly accommodating and criticized the staff in front of foreigners, and seemed to be saying this on purpose in front of Lin Huaisheng. Colonel, how about the ground attack? To be honest, it's not very good. At present, only 500 pounds of ordinary aerial bombs can be used, there is no laser aiming pod, and it cannot attack targets that are too small or moving. It's also too small, and its dispatch efficiency is definitely not as good as that of the Phantom V. Well, it's really too small. Lin Huaisheng nodded and said yes, he didn't know about Air Force planes, but felt that this plane was better than the common domestic J-6 or J-5 planes. Not much. You have more ideal multi-role fighters, such as the J-10 fighter with a larger bomb load. Have you been to China? Every year. Chengdu, Zhuhai, and Shenyang. The colonel smiled. Said. Oh yes, Lin Huaisheng saw some Pakistani ground crews preparing to dismantle the missiles on the wingtips. What's going on here? Part of the French equipment, it's always been working fine, but today there's something wrong with these magic missiles. Maybe there's a problem with the cooling part of the seeker, and it can't lock onto the target. Good luck to the Indian pilot. These missiles were purchased from Libya a few years ago with the Mirage V. Gaddafi rubbed off the original factory batch number. We can only believe what they say about the shelf life. I have also been to Libya and their weapons are well maintained. It's a problem. By the way, the missile fuse has been disarmed, and it's better for us to stay away. Colonel, you just said that the Indian army is preparing to attack on the border. Lin Huaisheng quickly followed up with Colonel Sami, while returning the topic to the Indian army. I think you can see better with satellites. The Indians are rushing to repair the roads in the valley. Normally, they are not so diligent, especially in April. Don't you think it is strange? Of course there are some strange. I just heard that the special envoy of the United Nations will come the day after tomorrow, which may lead to a new reconciliation between the two countries. Lin Huaisheng deliberately involved the United Nations, so that he seemed not so enthusiastic about the war situation. In fact, he did not believe it at all. The UN envoy was able to hold back the new BJP Prime Minister. My friend, if the envoy is always useful, what do you and I do? The colonel teased. By the way, my friend, do you know Major Song Ning? Colonel Sammy asked immediately. Song Ning? Who? Lin Huaisheng looked around his companions and shook his head. Apparently they had never heard of the name. It was the Chinese Air Force major who was visiting our base of the 33rd Wing and brought two J-10 aircraft for a test flight. I just thought that you might know each other in China, the colonel said. Colonel, we have an army of several million people. After Lin Huaisheng finished speaking, everyone laughed, and then each got into a different car and drove in different directions. In northern India, Lieutenant Colonel Mosen sat behind his desk at Bareilly Air Force Base, looking furious, while Lieutenants Goya and Lieutenant Jafar, standing straight in front, were clearly being scolded. Lieutenant, why did you stop contacting? The lieutenant colonel threw his cap on the table and asked. Terrain problem, Squadron Commander. The Ridge blocks radio communications. Terrain problem. Good interface. I'll ask you again, do you remember the rules of engagement? Lieutenant Colonel Mosen continued to ask, this question is like an obvious trap, but you have to jump into it. Remember, long-distance attack. Goya replied. Why not? Report to the squadron commander, this is because long-range attacks will not work, just like the Lion Squadron always fails. So, Goya immediately used the 31st Squadron as a shield. So you're making your own way and going low altitude across the border. That's right, Squadron Commander, that's what happened. That's what I thought at the time. It's the lives of the two of you. After finishing speaking, the squadron leader picked up a towel and wiped the sweat from his forehead. If he really lost a Su-30, it would be difficult for him to afford it, and he was nervous when he thought about it. I didn't expect it at the time, but now I know. Goya replied, and Jafar, who was beside him, said nothing. Okay, let's talk about watching the enemy. Very cunning. When I found them, they were using the terrain to fly at a very low altitude. The first one destroyed was the Mirage 3. No, I think it was the Mirage V, because it looks bigger, Lieutenant Goya denied. What about the one that escaped? I'm sure it's a new type of fighter, much like the Thunderbolt fighter they got from China. It's worth studying. Are you sure it didn't hit? Report to the squadron commander. I can't confirm. When the radar lost its target, two R-27 missiles were still in pursuit, but I didn't see him shot down. Goya deliberately played a trick in his expression, so that it sounded as if he had shot down himself. 1.5 enemy planes. He did not want to be scolded one-sidedly. I think this matter must be severely punished, and it will have to wait until the wing captain returns from Bangalore from the Tejas fighter formation ceremony. The military's priority is strict discipline rather than record, especially in our 13th Wing. That's it? When the lieutenant colonel lowered his head and spoke, Goya pouted secretly, showing some disdain for these remarks. The phone on the desk rang, and the lieutenant colonel picked it up. Squadron commander, outside line. Who is it? It's the director of the Ministry of Defense. It's called Liu Yudnahan. The Ministry of Defense. Mosen clearly never heard the name, and the Defense Department never called him. 24 Squadron, please speak. Moxin picked up the phone and kept wiping away his sweat. It was too hot in April this year. Oh, the Department of Defense. Yes, Mr. Director, they are right in front of me, and I am considering the punishment. Yes. That's it, Lieutenant Colonel Mosin replied, nodding. What? The Secretary of Defense wants to see them. What's going on? Mosin replied in surprise. Although he couldn't hear what the person on the phone said, Lieutenant Goya sneaked a glance at his partner with a malicious smile on his face. A few seconds ago, he began to realize that things might be changing for the better. That's right, the second result can't be confirmed. I think it's really hard to confirm, including the wreckage of the first plane that also fell west of the line of actual control. Yes, Mr. Supervisor, the pilot reported. When they broke away, 2 R-27 missiles were still chasing. Yes, like you said, this missile has a long range, but it's a semi-active. The squadron commander's words were captured by the phone. The man interrupted, apparently not interested in an explanation of the missile's performance. Okay, I understand, I'll do as you said. Squadron Chief Moxin slowly put down the phone receiver, and then stared at the national flag on the table for a while. Listen, you two bastards, go back and iron your uniforms. Yes, Squadron Commander. A Dornier 228 will pick you up tomorrow morning to take you to New Delhi. Where? Squadron Captain. Go to New Delhi, go to the Ministry of Defense. You two bastards are in luck. The Minister of Defense is going to give you the warrior will and maybe meet the Prime Minister. It's hard for me to understand, but I must say that for our squadron, of course it's a good thing. That means we won't be punished, right? Goya continued to ask somehow. Lieutenant Colonel Moxin rolled his eyes and waved the two young men out. In the eyes of Lt. Colonel Henry Mosin, such absurdity could only suggest one thing, that the impetuous Ministry of Defense decided to make a big deal. Thinking of this possibility, the lieutenant colonel suddenly felt a scar on his forehead begin to throb faintly. It reminded him of how many years ago, when he was about the same age as Goya, he was pursued by 2 F-16s of Pakistan's 11th Squadron in the Kargil area. He also clearly remembered that his plane was continuously tracked by the enemy's radar and couldn't get rid of it. In the shrill screams of the Selena warning system, he desperately pulled the nose of the plane and made a nearly crazy dodging turns. A trailing Sidewinder missile could not keep up with this action of the MiG-23, but the proximity fuse still detonated the missile warhead 10 meters away, and the explosive shattered the cockpit glass cover, leaving him behind the scar on the forehead. He is still awakened by such a scene every time in his dreams. The way of war that Lieutenant Colonel Mosin yearns for now is to take advantage of technology and press the button at a long distance where the opponent cannot be seen, but the plane can return safely whether it hits or not, because he knows that the Pakistan Air Force will never be able to fly at close range. Easy to deal with. Since there is a phased array radar, advanced fire control, and advanced long-range missiles, why are these young people still keen on fighting?